I wasn't supposed to answer my phone during a shift. That was the rule. But rules have a way of breaking when you're waiting for news that might destroy your life, and the call I'd been dreading for 3 weeks came through while I was carrying a tray of wine into a room full of men who looked like they owned half the city. The word left my mouth before I could stop it: pronto. That's when everything went silent. The evening had started badly and gotten worse from there. I'd clocked in 15 minutes late at Osteria Nera, my hair still damp from the rain, my shirt wrinkled because I'd forgotten to pick up my dry cleaning. Again. Michelle, the server who usually handled the VIP section, had called out sick for the 3rd time this month, and somehow that meant I was being pulled from my regular tables to cover the private dining room. "Marissa, you're on the back room tonight," my manager David had said without looking up from his tablet. My stomach dropped. The private room? Michelle's out. You're covering. But I've never. You've been here 8 months. You know how to serve wine and take orders. It's the same job, just different guests. He finally looked at me, his expression tight. Important guests. Don't screw this up. Important. That was the word everyone used when they meant dangerous. I needed this job. Desperately. The kind of desperate that came from maxing out credit cards to cover my mother's funeral 6 months ago, from rent that ate 70% of my paycheck, from a legal situation in Italy that required lawyers I couldn't afford. The kind of desperate that made you take extra shifts, smile through harassment, and ignore every warning sign your gut screamed at you. Who are they? I asked quietly. David's jaw tightened. Business associates of the owner. That's all you need to know. Serve them. Don't ask questions. Don't linger. And for God's sake, don't make small talk. He walked away before I could ask anything else. I grabbed my apron and tied it with shaking fingers. Carlos, one of the senior servers, caught my eye from across the room and shook his head slowly. A warning I didn't understand. The main dining room of Osteria Nera was beautiful, all exposed brick, dark wood beams, and soft amber lighting that made everyone look like they belonged in a magazine. But the hallway that led to the private room felt different. Colder. The carpet absorbed sound. The walls seemed closer together. I stopped outside the heavy oak door and took a breath that didn't quite fill my lungs. Then I knocked once and entered. The private room was dimmer than the rest of the restaurant, lit by golden sconces that cast long shadows across dark mahogany furniture. A long table stretched down the center, and around it sat 6 men in suits that probably cost more than I made in a month. Papers were spread between them. Wine glasses sat untouched. The conversation stopped the moment I walked in. But it was the man at the center who made me forget how to breathe. He wasn't the oldest, maybe mid-30s, but power radiated from him like heat from a flame. Dark hair swept back, sharp jawline, eyes so dark they looked black in the low light. His suit was perfectly tailored, charcoal gray with no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. He sat perfectly still while everyone else seemed to lean toward him, like gravity worked differently in his presence. Those dark eyes locked onto mine. I dropped my gaze immediately, heat flooding my face. "Good evening, gentlemen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My name is Marissa. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with drinks?" I moved around the table, taking orders, hyper-aware of his gaze following my every movement. When I reached him last, he didn't answer right away. "You're new to this room," he said. "Not a question." A statement delivered in a voice that was dangerously calm, with the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't place. "Yes, sir. I'm filling in tonight." Something flickered across his face. Calculation, maybe. Or suspicion. "Barolo," he said finally. "The 2016. I nodded and escaped into the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hey friend, if you're enjoying this story, subscribe to Undiluted Love Stories. It's 1 second for you but a big deal for me. Now, let's continue. I placed the drink orders at the bar and tried to calm my breathing. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. The international number had been calling for days. Lawyers from my mother's hometown in southern Italy, asking about property I'd never seen, debts I didn't know existed, family names I'd been taught never to mention. My mother had spent 20 years running from whatever she'd left behind. I'd spent the 6 months since her death learning that the past doesn't stay buried just because you want it to. When I returned with the tray of wine, the atmosphere had shifted. Voices were lower. Faces harder. I distributed the glasses in silence, trying to be invisible, trying to be nothing. As I set the Barolo in front of him, my phone rang. Not buzzed. Rang. The sound shattered the quiet like a gunshot. I fumbled for my apron pocket, mortification burning through me. Every man at the table turned to stare. I should have silenced it. I should have left it in my locker. But I'd been waiting for this call, this specific call, about whether the legal nightmare in Italy had gotten worse or if there was any possible way out. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. The screen glowed with an unknown number. Italian country code. I took 2 steps toward the door and answered without thinking. Pronto. The word came out automatically, the way it always did when my brain switched to my mother's language. The lawyer on the other end spoke rapidly, asking about documents, signatures, names I hadn't used in years. I closed my eyes, trying to process his words, trying to understand what he was telling me. When I opened them, the room was frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. Every single man at that table was staring at me like I just pulled a gun instead of answered a phone. But it was his reaction that made my blood run cold. The man at the center of the table had gone completely still. His glass hovered halfway to his lips, forgotten. His eyes were locked on me with an intensity that felt physical, like I could feel the weight of his attention pressing against my skin. He set his glass down. Slowly. Carefully. Where, he asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, did you learn to speak Italian like that? I stared at him, my mouth dry, the phone still pressed to my ear. My voice cracked. I grew up with it. His eyes narrowed. Just slightly. But enough that I saw it. He leaned back in his chair and said something in rapid Sicilian dialect to the man beside him. A test. I knew it was a test because my mother had taught me to recognize tests like this. And I understood every word. The man beside him responded, also in dialect, his eyes flicking to me with something that looked like alarm. The dark-eyed man's gaze never left my face. He was waiting. Watching. I could pretend I didn't understand. I could smile politely and apologize again for the interruption. But something in his expression told me that lying would be worse. I answered him back. In perfect Sicilian. His hand, which had been reaching for his wine, stopped mid-air. For the first time all evening, Salvatore Luciani, though I didn't know his name yet, looked genuinely surprised. And in a room full of dangerous men, that was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. The silence that followed my response felt alive. It pressed against my eardrums, thick and suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the phone trembling slightly in my hand, could sense the shift in the room's atmosphere from professional dinner to something else entirely. Something I didn't have a name for but recognized instinctively as danger. The dark-eyed man, the one whose question I just answered in flawless Sicilian, tilted his head slightly. Studying me. His expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had sharpened, like a lens coming into focus on a subject that had suddenly become interesting. End your call, he said quietly. Not a request. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, where the lawyer was still talking, still asking questions I couldn't process anymore. I need to. Now. The single word carried enough weight that I found myself murmuring an apology to the lawyer and ending the call. My hands were shaking as I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I apologize for the interruption, I managed, falling back on the script of professional service. Would you like to order your meals now? No one answered. The man to his left, older with silver at his temples, leaned close and murmured something I couldn't hear. The dark-eyed man raised one hand slightly, a gesture so small it was almost invisible, and the older man went silent immediately. What's your name? He asked me. Marissa, sir. I mentioned it when Your full name. My throat went dry. Marissa Hayes. Hayes. He tested the name like it was wine he wasn't sure about. That's not Italian. No, sir. It's my father's name. And your mother's? The question landed like a trap I'd walked into without seeing. Every instinct I had screamed at me to lie, to deflect, to give him nothing. But those dark eyes were reading me like text on a page, and I had the horrible feeling that he'd know the moment I tried to deceive him. Rossetti, I said quietly. Her maiden name was Rossetti. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. He exchanged a glance with the man to his right, a younger man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. They didn't speak, but something passed between them, some wordless communication that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Where in Italy is your family from?" the dark-eyed man asked, his tone conversational now, almost friendly. Which somehow made it worse. "Calabria. A small town. You wouldn't have heard of it. Try me. Sarah San Bruno." The reaction was immediate. The younger man with the scar sat up straighter. The older man's eyes widened fractionally, and the dark-eyed man went very, very still. "Interesting," he said softly. "Very interesting." I didn't understand what was happening, but every nerve ending in my body was screaming at me to run. To get out of this room, out of this restaurant, maybe out of this city entirely. Should I give you a few more minutes to look at the menu?" I asked, trying desperately to steer this back to normal, back to something I understood. He ignored the question entirely. Instead, he switched to Italian, not dialect this time, but formal, almost elegant Italian. "How long have you worked here, Marissa?" I answered in the same language without thinking. 8 months. "And before that?" "I was between jobs." "Doing what?" "Various things. Retail. Administrative work." I was careful to keep my answers vague, instinctive self-preservation kicking in. "Where did you live before New York?" The questions were coming faster now, each one feeling more invasive than the last. The other men at the table were watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. "Boston," I said. "Family there?" "No. No family anywhere?" His eyebrow raised slightly. "Except in Sarah San Bruno?" "My mother passed away 6 months ago. I don't have other family." "I'm sorry for your loss." The condolence sounded genuine, which made it more unsettling somehow. "And your father?" "I don't know him. He left before I was born." He absorbed this information with a slight nod, then said something in rapid dialect to the table at large. I caught most of it, something about background checks and making calls, but pretended I hadn't understood. That pretense lasted exactly 3 seconds. "You understood that," he said, switching back to English. "Not a question. An accusation." I swallowed hard. "I understood some of it." "All of it," he corrected. "Your accent is too good. You didn't learn Italian in a classroom, Marissa Hayes. You learned it at a kitchen table. From your mother." The accuracy of that statement made my chest tighten. My mother's voice echoed in my memory, Italian mixed with English, switching between languages mid-sentence, teaching me to speak the way she spoke, to understand the old words, the regional phrases, the dialect that marked you as coming from a very specific place with a very specific history. "Yes," I admitted quietly. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Did your mother ever tell you why she left Italy?" "She said she wanted a better life." "Nothing else?" "No." "Did she ever mention any names? Family names? Business associates?" I shook my head, confusion mixing with growing fear. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because," he said, his voice dropping lower, "women from Sarah San Bruno don't just leave. Especially women from families old enough to still speak proper dialect. They leave for a reason. Usually a very specific kind of reason." The older man cleared his throat. "Salvatore." So that was his name. Salvatore. Salvatore held up one hand, silencing the interruption without looking away from me. "What was your mother's family name?" "Not Rossetti. Her mother's family name." I blinked, thrown by the question. "I don't know. She never talked about her mother. She died when my mother was young." "Grandparents? Aunts? Uncles?" "I don't know anything about them. My mother didn't talk about her past." "Convenient," he murmured. "It's not convenient," I snapped, fear suddenly transmuting into anger. "It's painful. She's dead. She took her secrets with her. And I don't understand why you're interrogating me about my family history when all I did was answer a phone call." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. The other men shifted uncomfortably. No one, apparently, spoke to Salvatore like that. But instead of anger, I saw something else cross his face. Approval, maybe. Or respect. "You're right," he said, surprising me. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." He gestured to my notepad, still clutched in my trembling hand. "Please. Take our orders. We'll have the..." The door opened behind me. I turned to see a tall man in a black suit enter, moving with a precise economy of motion that suggested military training. He didn't acknowledge me at all, just crossed directly to Salvatore and bent down to whisper in his ear. I saw Salvatore's jaw tighten. Saw his hands flex once against the table. When the man finished speaking and stepped back, Salvatore stood. Every other man at the table immediately rose with him. "Gentlemen," Salvatore said in English, "we'll continue this discussion elsewhere. Something has come up that requires immediate attention." He pulled a money clip from his pocket. I caught a glimpse of several $100 bills, and set 5 of them on the table without counting. "For the wine. And for the interruption to your evening, Marissa." I stared at the money. That was easily $700. 6 glasses of wine and 15 minutes of questions. "I can't accept." "You can." He buttoned his suit jacket with one hand, his movements precise and controlled. "And you will." The men filed toward the door. Salvatore was the last to leave, but he paused in the doorway and turned back to look at me. "Don't leave the restaurant," he said quietly. "Not until I return." It wasn't a request. It was an order. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the private dining room with $700 on the table and the terrifying certainty that answering one phone call in Italian had just changed my life in ways I couldn't begin to understand. I stood frozen in the empty private dining room, staring at the $700 on the table like it might explode if I touched it. My hands were still shaking. My heart hadn't stopped racing since the moment I'd answered that phone call. "Don't leave the restaurant. Not until I return." The words echoed in my head, spoken with such casual authority that obeying hadn't even felt like a choice. But now, alone in the silence, the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. A man I didn't know, a dangerous man, if the fear in everyone's eyes was any indication, had just interrogated me about my family history, my mother's past, my connection to a small town in southern Italy that I'd only visited twice in my entire life. And then he'd told me to wait for him. Like I belonged to him. Like he had the right. I grabbed the money with trembling fingers and fled the room. The main dining room was still buzzing with normal activity, couples sharing dessert, business dinners winding down, the comfortable noise of silverware and conversation. It felt like a different universe from the one I'd just left. Carlos caught my eye from across the room and made a sharp gesture toward the kitchen. I followed him through the swinging doors, past the line cooks who were too busy to notice us, into the narrow hallway that led to the office and storage rooms. "What the hell happened in there?" Carlos hissed the moment we were alone. "You were in that room for 20 minutes. They never stay that long." And Luciani looked, he stopped, searching for the word. "Different. When he left." "Luciani." I repeated. "That's his name? Salvatore Luciani." Carlos stared at me like I just asked if the sky was blue. "You don't know who he is?" "Should I?" "Jesus, Marissa." He ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely stressed. "Salvatore Luciani basically owns half the restaurants in this city. And that's just his legitimate business. The other half," he lowered his voice even further. "People don't talk about the other half. Not if they're smart." My stomach twisted. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the men in that room weren't business associates. They were," he glanced around, "even though we were alone. They're connected, Marissa. And Luciani is the most connected of all. You don't ask him questions. You don't make him curious. You definitely don't make him remember you." Too late for that, I thought, remembering the way Salvatore's eyes had locked onto mine when I'd spoken Sicilian. The way recognition had flickered across his face when I'd mentioned Sarah San Bruno. "He told me not to leave," I said quietly. Carlos went pale. "What?" "Before he left. He told me not to leave the restaurant until he came back." "Then you need to run. Right now. Out the back door. Don't even grab your things, just..." Carlos. David's voice cut through the hallway like a whip. Our manager stood in the kitchen doorway, his expression grim. Office. Now. Carlos shot me one last look, apologetic, frightened, before disappearing into the kitchen. David gestured for me to follow him. The office was small and cluttered, smelling of old coffee and printer ink. David closed the door and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. I need you to tell me exactly what happened in that room, he said. I served them wine. I took their drink orders. And then my phone rang and You answered it. In Italian. David's jaw was tight. Do you have any idea how badly you just screwed up? I got an important call. I apologized. I don't understand why. Because those men don't like surprises, Marissa. They don't like coincidences. And a server who just happens to speak fluent Italian, just happens to be working the one night they're here, just happens to answer a phone call in perfect Sicilian dialect. He shook his head. That looks like something. And when things look like something to men like Salvatore Luciani, people disappear. The fear that had been simmering in my chest turned to ice. I didn't plan this. I was covering for Michelle. I didn't even know they'd be here. I know that. But does he? The question hung in the air between us. Before I could answer, David's desk phone rang. He stared at it for a long moment before picking up. Yes. His face went carefully blank as he listened. I understand. Yes, she's here. Of course. He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been pity. Mr. Luciani is back. He's waiting for you in the wine cellar office. The what? Behind the wine cellar. There's a private office. Not many people know about it. David opened the door and gestured for me to leave. Whatever he asks you, Marissa, tell him the truth. All of it. Men like him can smell a lie from a mile away. The wine cellar was accessed through a door behind the bar that I'd always assumed led to storage. Stone steps descended into cool darkness, lit by dim overhead lights that barely penetrated the shadows. Rows of wine bottles lined the walls, thousands of them, their labels facing outward like watching eyes. At the far end of the cellar, another door stood open. Light spilled out from inside. I forced myself to walk toward it, my footsteps echoing off stone walls. When I reached the doorway, I stopped. It was an office, but not like any I'd seen before. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, a massive desk that looked like it belonged in a different century. And sitting behind that desk, jacket removed, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with what looked like old scars, was Salvatore Luciani. He was reading something, a file folder, papers spread across the desk. He didn't look up when I entered. Close the door, he said. I hesitated, every survival instinct screaming at me not to trap myself in a room with this man. But Carlos's words echoed in my head, people disappear, and I realized that running would only make things worse. I closed the door. Salvatore finally looked up. In the warmer lighting of the office, I could see details I'd missed before. The precise cut of his hair. The shadow of exhaustion under his eyes. The way he held himself with absolute control, like a man who'd learned long ago that showing weakness was fatal. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat, my hands gripping my apron so tightly my knuckles went white. He studied me for a long moment, then turned the file folder around so I could see it. My stomach dropped. It was a dossier. On me. My driver's license photo was paper-clipped to the first page. Below it, neatly typed information, my full name, my address, my social security number, my employment history for the past 5 years. My college transcripts. Bank statements. And there, near the bottom, a document I recognized with ice-cold clarity. My mother's death certificate. Translated into Italian. How? My voice came out as a whisper. How do you have this? I had it pulled while we were at dinner, Salvatore said calmly. It took 20 minutes. You'd be surprised what you can learn about someone in 20 minutes if you have the right resources. I stared at the papers, feeling violated, exposed, like he'd stripped me naked in front of strangers. You had no right. I had every right. His voice was flat, matter of fact. You walked into a private meeting speaking a language you shouldn't know, from a region you shouldn't be connected to, at a time that's far too convenient to be coincidence. I told you, I was just covering for another server. I know. I had your manager verify your schedule. I had your coworker Michelle called at home to confirm she actually called in sick. He leaned back in his chair. You're telling the truth about that part. Which makes the rest of this more interesting. The rest of what? He pulled another sheet from the file. Your mother's maiden name was Rossetti. But that's not the name that concerns me. He looked up, his dark eyes pinning me in place. Your mother's mother, your maternal grandmother, was born Juliana Mantova. Does that name mean anything to you? I shook my head. I told you, my mother never talked about her family. Mantova is an old name. A very old name in certain circles in southern Italy. The kind of name that carries history. And obligations. And debts. I don't understand what you're... 23 years ago, Salvatore interrupted, a woman named Elena Rossetti disappeared from Serra San Bruno. She was 19 years old. Daughter of the Mantova family. She vanished without a trace in the middle of a territorial dispute that killed 17 people. He paused. 3 months later, a woman named Elena Hayes gave birth to a daughter in Boston. You. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process what he was saying. My mother's name was Elena, I managed. But she wasn't involved in anything like that. She was just... Just what? A waitress? A single mother trying to build a better life. Salvatore's expression softened slightly. I'm sure that's true. I'm sure she tried to leave all of it behind. But the thing about family in certain circles, Marissa, is that it doesn't let you go just because you run away. What do you want from me? The question came out raw, desperate. He closed the file and set it aside. I want to know why you're here. In my restaurant. Speaking my language. Connected to a family that should have stayed buried 20 years ago. I didn't know. The words burst out of me, loud in the quiet office. I didn't know about any of this. My mother never told me. She never, my voice cracked. She died 6 months ago and left me nothing. No money, no answers, no family. Just debt and lawyers calling about property I've never seen and names I don't recognize. Something in Salvatore's expression shifted. Not quite sympathy, but acknowledgement. The property dispute, he said quietly. In Serra San Bruno. That's what the call was about tonight. Wasn't it? I nodded, not trusting my voice. What did the lawyers say? That there's land. A house. Maybe other assets. That belonged to my mother's family. That might belong to me now. But there are other people claiming it. People who say my mother had no right to it because she... I stopped, the lawyer's exact words coming back to me. Because she forfeited her claim when she betrayed her family. The silence that followed was absolute. Salvatore stood slowly and moved to the window, a small high window that looked out at street level. I could see feet walking past, normal people living normal lives, completely unaware of the conversation happening beneath them. Your mother didn't betray her family, he said finally, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. She saved a life. Mine. I stared at his back, my mind refusing to process what I'd just heard. He turned to face me. I was 18 years old. Stupid. Reckless. I was sent to Serra San Bruno to learn discipline, to learn how things worked. Instead, I nearly got myself killed in the middle of that territorial dispute your mother ran from. His jaw tightened. She found me bleeding out in an alley. She could have walked away. Should have walked away. Instead, she got me to safety. Called people who could help. And by doing that, she marked herself. Marked herself how? As someone who chose a side. The wrong side, according to some. And in that world, choosing the wrong side means you can't stay. He moved back to his desk but didn't sit. I've spent 20 years wondering what happened to her. Whether she survived. Whether the people she ran from ever found her. And now you walk into my restaurant speaking her voice, carrying her face, connected to her name, he stopped. It's not a coincidence, Marissa. It can't be. But it is. I stood, my chair scraping back. I didn't plan any of this. I needed a job. I took the first one I could find. I had no idea you'd be here. No idea my mother had any connection to whatever world you're part of. I just wanted to survive. I know. He said it with such certainty that I stopped. I believe you. Which is why we have a problem. What problem? You're not the only one who knows your mother's real identity now. The call you answered tonight, it was on an international line. Probably routed through multiple countries, but traceable if someone really wanted to trace it. And those lawyers asking about property? They're not working alone. Someone sent them. Someone who wants to know if Elena Rossetti's daughter exists. If she has any claim to Mantova assets. If she knows anything about what her mother took when she ran. My blood went cold. Took? My mother didn't take anything. She had nothing when she... Information is worth more than money in certain circles, Salvatore said. And your mother knew things. Saw things. If anyone thinks you inherited that knowledge, or that you could be used to settle old scores, you become a target. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. I don't know anything. I can't be used for anything. I'm nobody. You were nobody, he corrected quietly. Until tonight. Until you answered that phone in Italian in a room full of men who now know exactly who you are. Or who you're connected to. So what happens now? I whispered. You said people disappear. Is that what's going to happen to me? Salvatore was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled. Small, bitter, without humor. No, he said. Because I owed your mother a debt. And I pay my debts. He pulled out his chair and sat, gesturing for me to do the same. I'm going to offer you a choice, Marissa Hayes. And I want you to understand that this is a real choice, not an illusion of one. I sat slowly, my heart pounding. Option 1, you walk out of here tonight. You quit this job. You leave New York and go somewhere far away, somewhere I'll help you disappear to. New identity, clean background, enough money to start over. I'll make sure the people looking for you never find you. You'll be safe. But you'll be alone. And you'll spend the rest of your life running from a past you didn't choose. He paused, letting that sink in. Option 2, you stay. You work for me, not as a server, but as a translator and cultural intermediary. Someone who can move between worlds the way your mother once did. In exchange, I protect you. I erase your name from the lists that are already circulating. I make it clear that you're under my protection, and that anyone who touches you answers to me. His eyes held mine. You won't be free. You'll be tied to me, to my world, to everything your mother tried to escape. But you'll have answers. About who she was. What she did. Why she ran. And what she left behind. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The choice he was offering felt impossible. Run from everything or dive into the darkness my mother had spent her life hiding from. How long do I have to decide? I asked. Until I finish this sentence. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Because the moment you walked out of that dining room tonight, decisions started being made about you by people who don't care what you want. The only question is whether you want a voice in what happens next, or whether you want to hope that running far enough will keep you safe. My hands were shaking again. I thought about my mother. About the secret she'd kept, the fear she'd carried, the way she'd sometimes stare out windows like she was waiting for something terrible to find her. It had found her anyway. In the form of cancer that ate her alive in 6 months. And now it had found me. I looked at Salvatore Luciani, this dangerous, controlled man who claimed to owe my mother a debt, and made a choice that felt less like freedom and more like stepping off a cliff. I'll stay, I said. He nodded once. Like he'd known what I would choose. Then we have work to do, he said, and pulled out his phone. Salvatore made 3 phone calls while I sat frozen in the leather chair across from his desk. He spoke in Italian, formal Italian, not dialect, and though I only caught fragments, certain words stood out like warning signs: background, protection, surveillance, immediate. Each call lasted less than 2 minutes. Each one ended with a crisp acknowledgement from whoever was on the other end. No questions asked. No hesitation. When he finished, he set his phone down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. First things first, he said. Where are you living? Queens. Astoria. Alone. Yes. Good. You'll pack tonight. Tomorrow you'll move. I blinked, the words not quite processing. Move where? Somewhere secure. An apartment I own in Midtown. It's clean, furnished, and more importantly, it's monitored. No one gets in or out without my people knowing about it. I can't afford. You're not paying for it. Consider it part of your employment package. He pulled out a leather-bound notebook and began writing. You'll receive a salary. Double what you're making here. Health insurance. Phone, a new one, encrypted. You'll use it for all communication from now on. I already have a phone, which is compromised the moment those lawyers have your number. The new phone will be delivered tomorrow morning along with instructions for destroying your current one. He didn't look up from his writing. You'll also receive a credit card for expenses. Use it for anything work-related. Food, transportation, clothing appropriate for the environments you'll be operating in. What environments? Business meetings. Dinners. Occasionally more formal events. You'll need to look the part. He finally glanced up. I'm not asking you to change who you are, Marissa. But the people will be dealing with make judgments based on appearances. If you look like hired help, they'll treat you like hired help. If you look like you belong, they'll be more careless around you. The reality of what I'd agreed to was starting to crystallize. This wasn't just a job. It was a complete restructuring of my life. What exactly will I be doing? I asked carefully. Translating, primarily. But not just words, context. Subtext. The things people say when they think no one who matters is listening. He closed the notebook. Men in my line of work do business across borders. Language barriers create opportunities for misunderstanding or deliberate deception. I need someone who can hear what's actually being said, not just what's being translated. And you think I can do that? Your mother could. She had an ear for it, could tell when someone was lying in 3 languages. Something almost like fondness crossed his face. She saved my life by understanding a conversation I was too young and stupid to properly interpret. I'm hoping that particular skill runs in the family. I thought about my mother, about the way she'd sometimes stop mid-conversation when we were in public, her head tilting slightly like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. How she'd pull me away from certain people without explanation. How she'd taught me not just Italian, but the subtle differences in dialect that marked someone's origin, their allegiances, their history. She was always listening, I said quietly. Even when it looked like she wasn't paying attention. She was always listening. Exactly. Salvatore stood and moved to a cabinet against the wall, pulling out a bottle of amber liquid and 2 glasses. Which is why this arrangement works. You need protection. I need someone with your particular skills. It's mutually beneficial. He poured 2 fingers of what looked like very expensive whiskey into each glass and offered me one. I took it but didn't drink. You said this was a real choice. But it doesn't feel like one. It feels like you're telling me how my life is going to be now. Because the alternative is chaos. He took a sip of his whiskey, watching me over the rim of the glass. If I let you walk out of here with no protection, you'd be lucky to make it a week before someone found you. The lawyers calling about your mother's property? They're not the only ones looking. There are people in Serra San Bruno who've waited 20 years to settle accounts with the Mantova family. And there are people in my world who'd see you as leverage against me the moment they know I have an interest in keeping you alive. So I'm bait. No. You're protected. There's a difference. He set his glass down. But I won't lie to you, Marissa. By accepting my protection, you're accepting association with me. That comes with risks. People who want to hurt me might try to use you. People who want to prove themselves might see you as a target. That's why the security isn't optional. That's why you follow the protocols I establish. Not because I'm controlling you, but because the moment you don't, you become vulnerable. I finally took a drink. The whiskey burned going down, but it helped steady my nerves. How long does this last? This arrangement? Until the immediate threat passes. Until we've identified everyone who's looking for you and neutralized their interest. He paused. Or until you decide the cost is too high and you choose to disappear instead. And you'd let me? Just walk away? After an appropriate transition period, yes. I'm not interested in keeping prisoners, Marissa. I'm interested in keeping you alive long enough to pay back the debt I owe your mother. There was something in his voice when he mentioned my mother, something that went beyond simple obligation. I set my glass down and met his eyes directly. You cared about her, I said. It wasn't a question. His expression shuddered immediately, walls going up so fast I almost missed the flicker of emotion that preceded them. I respected her. She made a choice that cost her everything to save a stranger. That kind of courage is rare. That's not what I asked. We stared at each other across the desk, the air between us charged with something I didn't want to name. Finally, Salvatore looked away. She was 19 years old. I was 18. We knew each other for 6 hours before she disappeared from my life forever. He picked up his glass again, studying the amber liquid like it held answers. So no, Marissa. I didn't know her long enough to care about her in any meaningful way. But I've spent 20 years wondering what happened to her. Whether she was happy. Whether she was safe. Whether she ever regretted helping me. She never talked about you, I said softly. But she had nightmares. About Italy. About people finding her. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and check all the locks. Every door. Every window. Even when I was a kid, I knew she was running from something. Salvatore's jaw tightened. She shouldn't have had to live like that. But she did. Because of a choice she made. Because of you. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't take them back. He flinched slightly, the first genuine reaction I'd seen from him that wasn't carefully controlled. You're right, he said quietly. Which is why I'm going to make sure her daughter doesn't end up the same way. The rest of the conversation was business. Practical details delivered in the same calm, authoritative tone he'd used for everything else. I would finish my shift tonight, maintain appearances. Tomorrow, a car would pick me up at my apartment at 8 a.m. I would pack only essentials, everything else would be handled. I would not tell anyone where I was going. I would not contact anyone from my old life without clearance. What about work? My manager will expect notice. Already handled. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay and a reference if you need one in the future. As far as Osteria Nera is concerned, you gave notice tonight for personal reasons. You already told him I was quitting? Before I even agreed to stay. I told him you'd be transitioning to other employment. The details were left vague. Salvatore checked his watch, expensive, mechanical, probably worth more than my car. It's nearly midnight. You should go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be busy. I stood, my legs unsteady beneath me. The whiskey hadn't helped. Or maybe it had helped too much. Marissa. His voice stopped me at the door. One more thing. I turned back. The lawyers who called you tonight, if they call again, don't answer. Forward the call to the number I'm about to give you. My people will handle it. Who are they really? The lawyers. Information gatherers. Probably working for multiple interested parties. They cast a wide net, see what they catch, then sell what they find to the highest bidder. He pulled a business card from his desk drawer and held it out. This is the number. Memorize it. Don't save it in your phone until you have the new one. I took the card. It was plain cream-colored, with nothing but a phone number embossed in black. No name. No company. Just digits. Salvatore, I said, testing his name in my mouth for the first time. If my mother saved your life, why didn't you try to find her? In 20 years, with all your resources, why didn't you look? The question seemed to hit him harder than my earlier accusation. He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Because she made a choice, he said finally. To run. To disappear. To build a life away from all of this. And I thought, he stopped, something raw flickering across his face before disappearing. I thought respecting that choice was the least I could do. That if she wanted to be found, she would have reached out. That if she was happy, I had no right to drag her back into the darkness. And now. Now she's gone. And her daughter is standing in the same darkness whether I dragged her here or not. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something other than control in them. Regret, maybe. Or guilt. So I'm going to do what I should have done 20 years ago. I'm going to make sure someone from the Mantova line survives. I left the wine cellar office with my head spinning and my hands still shaking. The restaurant was nearly empty now, just the closing staff wiping down tables and counting out registers. Carlos caught my eye from the bar and started toward me, but I shook my head. I couldn't talk about this. Couldn't explain. I grabbed my coat from the back and walked out into the February night. The cold air hit my face like a slap, sharp and clarifying. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the sliver of sky visible between buildings, trying to process everything that had happened in the span of 3 hours. I'd walked into work expecting a normal shift. I was leaving having agreed to append my entire life for a man I'd just met, because of a debt he owed a mother who'd never told me the truth about who she really was. A black car idled at the curb 20 feet away. As I watched, the back window rolled down, and I saw Salvatore's face in the dim interior light. "My driver will take you home," he called. "It's not safe for you to take the subway this late." "I take the subway every night." "You did. You don't anymore." It wasn't a suggestion. I wanted to argue. Wanted to prove that I still had some control over my own life. But I was exhausted and scared, and the thought of sitting alone on a subway platform at midnight made my skin crawl in a way it never had before. I got in the car. The driver was silent, professional, eyes forward. Salvatore had rolled the window back up, giving me privacy. Or maybe giving himself privacy. I couldn't tell. We drove through the city in silence, the lights of Manhattan giving way to the darker streets of Queens. When we pulled up in front of my building, a pre-war walk-up with a broken buzzer and graffiti on the mailboxes, the driver got out and opened my door. 8 a.m. miss, he said. His voice was neutral, accent vaguely Eastern European. "I'll be here." I nodded and climbed out. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Small. Cramped. Filled with second-hand furniture and the lingering smell of the Indian restaurant downstairs. I locked the door behind me, all 3 locks, and leaned against it, finally allowing myself to process the terror I'd been holding back all night. I'd made a deal with a man who operated in shadows. Who commanded fear with a word. Who knew things about me I hadn't known about myself. And the worst part? Some small, traitorous part of me was relieved. Because for 6 months, I'd been drowning. Working 3 jobs to cover my mother's medical debt and funeral expenses. Fielding calls from lawyers I couldn't afford to hire. Lying awake at night wondering if I'd end up homeless or worse. And now, someone was offering to take care of it. All of it. In exchange for a skill I hadn't even known I had. My mother's skill. I pulled out my phone and looked at the missed calls from the Italian lawyers. 6 calls total. All from the same number. Tomorrow, I'd forward them to the number on Salvatore's card. Tomorrow, someone else would handle the problem. Tomorrow, I'd start becoming someone I didn't recognize. But tonight, I was still Marissa Hayes. Still alone in my apartment. Still the daughter of a woman who'd kept secrets until the day she died. I walked to the small closet where I kept my mother's things, the few boxes I hadn't been able to throw away. Photos. Papers. A jewelry box with nothing valuable inside. At the bottom of one box, I found what I was looking for. An old photograph, edges yellowed, colors faded. My mother at 19, standing in front of a stone building I didn't recognize. She was smiling, but her eyes looked haunted. Like she already knew what was coming. On the back, in her handwriting, Sarah San Bruno, 2002. Before everything changed. I stared at that photograph for a long time, trying to reconcile the girl in the picture with the woman who'd raised me. The woman who'd died without ever explaining why she'd spent her whole life looking over her shoulder. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The car will arrive at 8 a.m. Packlight. Everything else will be provided. S. I read it 3 times before responding. How did you get this number? The reply came immediately. I've had it since you answered that call in Italian. I needed to know who you were. Now I do. I should have been angry. Should have felt violated. Instead, I felt something else. Something dangerous. I felt seen. For the first time since my mother died, someone knew who I really was. Where I came from. What I carried. And instead of running from it, he was walking toward it. I set the photograph on my nightstand and began to pack. The apartment Salvatore had arranged was nothing like my cramped studio in Queens. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. Marble countertops in a kitchen I'd never use. A bedroom larger than my entire previous apartment. Everything was white and chrome and glass, beautiful, sterile, and completely impersonal. It felt like a very expensive cage. I'd been living there for 3 days when Salvatore summoned me to my first real assignment. The text came at 7 in the morning. Car picks you up at 10. Wear something professional. Business meeting. You'll be translating. I stared at my closet, now filled with clothes that had appeared the day after I moved in. Tailored blouses. Pencil skirts. A black dress that probably cost more than a month's rent. Everything in my size, everything perfectly coordinated, everything chosen by someone who understood that clothing was armor in the world I'd entered. I chose a navy dress with a high neckline and paired it with heels that added 3 inches to my height. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked competent. Professional. Like someone who belonged in rooms where million-dollar deals were made. I looked like my mother might have looked, if she'd stayed in Italy. If she'd never run. The thought made my stomach twist. The driver, the same man from that first night, whose name I'd learned was Victor, picked me up precisely at 10. He held the door open without speaking, and I slid into the back seat where Salvatore was already waiting. He looked up from his phone as I entered. His eyes tracked over me once, a quick assessment that somehow felt more invasive than a lingering stare. "Good," he said simply, then returned to his phone. We drove in silence through Manhattan, heading downtown toward the financial district. I watched the city scroll past the tinted windows, trying to calm the anxiety building in my chest. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "A restaurant in Tribeca. We're meeting with potential business partners from Milan. They're interested in expanding their operations to New York. I'm interested in their distribution network in southern Italy." "What am I supposed to do?" "Listen. Translate when asked. And pay attention to what they say when they think you're not listening." He set his phone down and looked at me directly. "These men will assume you're decorative. They'll speak freely in Italian, making jokes, sharing information they'd never say in English. Your job is to hear all of it and remember it. You want me to spy on them. I want you to give me complete information so I can make informed decisions. Whether you call that spying is up to you." His expression was unreadable. "This is what you agreed to, Marissa. If you're having second thoughts." "I'm not." The words came out more firmly than I felt. "I'm just trying to understand the rules. The rules are simple. Trust no one. Question everything. And never let them see that you understand more than you're supposed to." The restaurant was the kind of place where the menu had no prices and the waitstaff moved like ghosts. We were led to a private room in the back, smaller than the one at Osteria Nera, but similarly designed for discretion. Heavy curtains. Soundproofed walls. A table set for 6. 3 men were already seated when we arrived. They stood as we entered, and I immediately catalogued details the way my mother had taught me without realizing she was teaching me: expensive suits but not quite tailored properly. Watches that were flashy rather than elegant. The kind of men who'd made money recently and wanted everyone to know it. The eldest, maybe 50, with graying hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, extended his hand to Salvatore. "Luciani. Finally, we meet in person." His English was heavily accented. "And you've brought a beautiful companion. How civilized." Salvatore's expression didn't change. "Marissa is my translator and business associate. She'll be sitting in on our discussion." Something flickered across the man's face. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance. But he recovered quickly, that false smile returning. Of course. I am Enzo Coretti. This is my associate Marco, and my nephew Stefano." We sat, and immediately the dynamic became clear. The 3 Italians spoke to Salvatore in heavily accented English, but among themselves, they switched seamlessly to Italian. And not just Italian, regional Italian, the kind with dialectical markers that told me exactly where they were from. Not Milan. Calabria. Specifically, the region around Reggio Calabria. My mother's region. I kept my face carefully neutral and let them talk. They ordered wine, expensive wine that they made a show of tasting and approving. They made small talk about the flight, the hotel, New York in winter. All perfectly pleasant. And then, as the appetizers arrived, Enzo leaned back in his chair and said something in rapid Italian to Marco. He was complaining about the food, about American portions, about how nothing here compared to real Italian cuisine. Standard tourist complaints. But then Stefano, the nephew, added in dialect, "At least the women are pretty. Luciani's translator looks like she'd be worth the trip alone." I didn't react. Didn't even blink. Just took a small bite of my salad and kept my eyes on my plate. Marco laughed. Careful. Men like Luciani don't share their toys. Who said anything about sharing? Stefano's voice was low, deliberately crude. I'm just appreciating the view. Besides, she probably doesn't understand a word. Americans never do. Salvatore's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Just for a second. Then he continued eating, but I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He'd understood every word. The business discussion began after the appetizers were cleared. Enzo laid out his proposal, a distribution network for specialty goods from southern Italy. He kept the language deliberately vague, but the subtext was clear. This wasn't about importing olive oil and wine. Salvatore listened, asked pointed questions, and generally gave nothing away. The perfect negotiator. But the Italians were getting comfortable. Too comfortable. The wine was flowing, and they were starting to treat me like furniture. Like I was invisible. Enzo excused himself to take a phone call, stepping out of the room. The moment the door closed, Marco leaned close to Stefano and spoke in quick, low Italian. The old man in Serra San Bruno finally agreed. We can move the shipment through his land, but he wants 40%. 40%? That's robbery. It's leverage. Ever since the Mantova family collapsed, he's the only one with clean access to the coast. He knows we need him. My blood went cold at the mention of the Mantova name. I kept my expression perfectly bland, but inside, my heart was racing. Salvatore's eyes flicked to me. Just once. A question. I gave the tiniest nod. I'd heard it. I understood it. Enzo returned, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. Numbers were discussed, shipping volumes, timelines, percentage splits. All carefully vague, all deniable if anyone was recording. But then, as dessert was being served, Enzo made a mistake. He said something in English, quoting a price. Marco corrected him in Italian, giving a different number, lower, by almost 30%. I saw the discrepancy immediately. They were quoting one price to Salvatore in English while discussing the real cost among themselves in Italian. A classic negotiation tactic, assuming the other party couldn't understand. I caught Salvatore's eye and held up 3 fingers below the table where only he could see. Then I made a subtle downward gesture. His expression didn't change, but I saw him absorb the information. The numbers you've quoted seem inconsistent with market rates, Salvatore said smoothly. Perhaps we should revisit the breakdown. Enzo's smile faltered slightly. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean that the cost structure you've described in English doesn't match the actual costs you've discussed among yourselves. Salvatore's voice was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. I'm not interested in partnerships built on deception, Mr. Coretti. So let's start again, shall we? With accurate numbers this time. The 3 Italians exchanged glances. Stefano looked confused. Marco looked alarmed. And Enzo looked furious. I don't know what your translator has been telling you, Enzo said carefully, but I assure you. My translator hasn't told me anything, Salvatore interrupted. She doesn't need to. I understand Italian perfectly well. I was simply curious to see how long you'd continue the charade. The silence that followed was arctic. Enzo's face had gone pale. You speak Italian. Fluently. Including the Calabrese dialect you've been using to discuss details you thought I couldn't understand. Salvatore picked up his wine glass, utterly relaxed. Did you really think I'd enter a negotiation with Italians without understanding the language? Or did you simply assume Americans are all ignorant? This is a misunderstanding, Enzo started. No. This is you attempting to inflate costs while simultaneously insulting my associate in a language you assumed she couldn't understand. Salvatore's eyes were cold. The meeting is over, Mr. Coretti. I'm not interested in doing business with people who lack basic respect. He stood. I stood with him. Wait, Marco said quickly. Perhaps we started off on the wrong foot. We can renegotiate. There's nothing to negotiate. Victor will show you out. As if summoned, Victor appeared in the doorway. The three Italians had no choice but to leave, their faces a mix of embarrassment and barely contained rage. When the door closed behind them, Salvatore turned to me. What else did they say? Everything. I told him. About the Mantova name. About the shipment. About the old man in Serra San Bruno with access to the coast. About every detail I'd caught in their supposedly private conversations. Salvatore listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The Mantova connection, he said finally. That's not a coincidence. What do you mean? These men aren't from Milan. They're from your mother's region. They mentioned the Mantova family specifically. His eyes locked onto mine. They came here looking for more than just business, Marissa. They came here looking for information. About you. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too exposed. But how would they even know I exist? Because someone told them. Someone who's been tracking the lawyers contacting you about your mother's property. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking rapidly in Italian too quick for me to follow completely. When he hung up, his expression was grim. We need to leave. Now. What's wrong? Those men weren't business partners. They were reconnaissance. And now they know exactly what you look like, where you are, and that you're under my protection. He gripped my elbow and guided me toward a back exit I hadn't noticed. Victor was already waiting with the car, engine running. We were inside and moving before I could process what was happening. Where are we going? Somewhere secure. I have a place outside the city. Salvatore was texting rapidly, his face illuminated by the phone's glow. I underestimated how quickly they'd move. That was a mistake. They seemed like businessmen. Crude but... They're scouts for someone bigger. Someone who wants to know if Elena Rossetti's daughter inherited more than just her mother's language skills. He looked up from his phone. You did well in there. You caught things I missed. You played your role perfectly. I didn't feel like I did anything. You stayed quiet when they assumed you were decoration. You listened when they thought no one understood. And you gave me information that probably just saved us from walking into a trap. Something almost like pride flickered across his face. Your mother would have been proud. The compliment shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. What happens now? I asked. Now we figure out who sent them. Who's coordinating the search for you? And why they're so interested in the Mantova family after 20 years of silence. The car sped through the city, heading toward the tunnel that would take us out of Manhattan. I watched the buildings blur past and tried to ignore the fear clawing at my chest. I'd proven my value today. I'd shown Salvatore that I could be useful, that his investment in protecting me wasn't wasted. But I'd also just painted a target on my back. And somewhere in Italy, people were making decisions about my life without ever having met me. Just like they'd done to my mother 20 years ago. Salvatore's phone rang. He answered in Italian, listened for a moment, then his expression went completely flat. When? A pause. How many? Another pause. Understood. He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been regret. What is it? I asked. Your apartment in Queens. The one you moved out of 3 days ago. He paused. Someone broke into it tonight. They tore the place apart. They were looking for something. My mouth went dry. Did they find anything? There was nothing to find. We'd already cleared it out. His eyes held mine. But if you'd still been living there, Marissa, they would have found you instead. The implications of that statement settled over me like ice water. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This wasn't just about information or old family debts. This was about people who were willing to break into apartments and tear them apart looking for me. People who wouldn't stop looking just because I'd moved. I want to know why, I said, my voice harder than I expected. I want to know what my mother did that's worth this much effort 20 years later. Salvatore nodded slowly. Then that's what we'll find out. Together. The car merged onto the highway, leaving the city lights behind. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't just afraid. I was angry. The safe house was 2 hours north of the city, hidden at the end of a private road that wound through dense woods. It was smaller than I expected, a modern structure of glass and stone that somehow managed to look both luxurious and fortified. Security cameras tracked our approach. Motion sensors blinked in the darkness. Victor pulled up to the entrance and opened my door without a word. Salvatore was already out, speaking rapidly on his phone in a language I didn't recognize. Russian, maybe. Inside, the house was all clean lines and minimalist furniture. A fire was already burning in the stone fireplace. Someone had been here recently, preparing for our arrival. There's a bedroom upstairs, second door on the right, Salvatore said, ending his call. You should get some rest. It's been a long day. I'm not tired. Then you should rest anyway. We have a lot to discuss tomorrow. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. We have a lot to discuss now. You said you'd give me answers. About my mother. About what she did. About why people are still looking for her family after 20 years. I crossed my arms, planting my feet. I just watched you end a business meeting because those men were looking for information about me. My apartment was broken into. I think I deserve to know what the hell is actually going on. Salvatore studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved to a cabinet, pulled out the same bottle of expensive whiskey from his office, and poured 2 glasses. He handed me one and gestured to the sofa facing the fireplace. Sit, he said. This is going to take a while. I sat, cradling the whiskey glass between my hands. Salvatore settled into the chair across from me, the firelight casting shadows across his face that made him look older, more worn. Your mother saved my life in 2002, he began. I've told you that much. What I didn't tell you is why I was in Serra San Bruno in the first place, or what was happening there at the time. He took a drink, his eyes distant, seeing something I couldn't. There was a war. Not the kind you read about in newspapers. A territorial dispute between families who'd controlled that region for generations. The Mantova family, your mother's family, controlled access to certain shipping routes along the coast. Routes that were extremely valuable for moving goods that couldn't go through official channels. You mean smuggling? Among other things. He didn't flinch from the accusation in my voice. The war started when a rival family tried to take control of those routes. People died. A lot of people. And the Mantova family was losing. What does this have to do with you? My family had business interests in the region. We were allies of the Mantova family. When the fighting escalated, I was sent there as a show of support. I was 18, arrogant, and completely unprepared for what I walked into. His jaw tightened. I was supposed to be protected, but someone betrayed the security detail. I was ambushed in an alley in Serra San Bruno, left for dead. And my mother found you. She was walking home from her job at a cafe. She could have kept walking. Should have kept walking. Instead, she dragged me into a doorway, called people who could help, and stayed with me until they arrived. He looked at me directly. She saved my life. But by doing that, she marked herself. Why? Because the people who ambushed me were working for the rival family. By helping me, your mother chose a side. And in that world, choosing a side means you're a target for everyone on the other side. I thought about my mother, 19 years old, making a split-second decision that would define the rest of her life. So she ran. Not immediately. She tried to stay. But the rival family started making threats. Her family tried to protect her, but they were already losing the war. And then, he paused, something dark crossing his face. Then something happened that made it impossible for her to stay. What happened? The Mantova family made a deal. To save themselves, they agreed to give up something valuable to the rival family. Information about shipping routes, yes. But also, he stopped, seeming to choose his words carefully. Also information about everyone who'd helped the other side. Names. Addresses. Details about who could be leveraged or eliminated. My blood ran cold. They sold out my mother. They sold out everyone they considered expendable. Your mother was just one name on a very long list. Salvatore's voice was quiet, almost gentle. But she was smart. She heard the rumors before the deal was finalized. She took what money she had and disappeared in the middle of the night. By the time the list was delivered, she was already gone. Did they look for her? For a while. But the war ended shortly after. The rival family got what they wanted. The Mantova family was absorbed into the larger organization. And your mother became a footnote, someone who'd escaped but wasn't worth the resources to track down. He took another drink. Until now. Why now? What changed? Salvatore set his glass down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Because the old guard is dying off. The people who made that original deal, the ones who remember the details, they're being replaced by a younger generation who's trying to consolidate power. And that means going through old records, settling old accounts, reclaiming assets that were lost. What assets? My mother had nothing. She died with medical debt she couldn't pay. She had information. She knew things about the Mantova family's operations that no one outside the inner circle should have known. Routes. Contacts. Financial arrangements. He paused. And she had a birthright. Mantova land and property that technically passed to her when her mother died. Property that's worth a considerable amount now that the region has been developed. The pieces started falling into place. The lawyers. The property dispute. Someone realized that Elena Rossetti had a daughter. That you might have a legitimate claim to Mantova assets. And they want to know what else your mother might have passed down. What information? What secrets? But I don't know anything. She never told me. They don't believe that. How could they? Your mother disappeared for 20 years, kept her past secret, raised a daughter who speaks perfect Italian and Calabrese dialect. From their perspective, that looks like someone who is very carefully preserving knowledge for the next generation. I stood abruptly, the whiskey sloshing in my glass. This is insane. I'm not sitting on some treasure trove of criminal intelligence. I'm a waitress who can barely pay rent. I know that. But they don't. And until they're convinced you're not a threat, or not useful, they won't stop looking. I paced to the window, looking out at the dark woods surrounding the house. My reflection stared back at me, ghostly in the glass. You didn't freeze because I spoke Italian, I said quietly, remembering the moment in the restaurant that had started all of this. You froze because I reminded you of something you buried. Behind me, I heard Salvatore stand. His footsteps were soft on the hardwood floor as he approached. You sounded exactly like her, he said, his voice closer than I expected. The same cadence. The same regional markers. For a moment I thought, he stopped. I turned to face him. We were standing too close, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried. You thought what? I thought she'd come back. That somehow, impossibly, she'd survived and come back. His expression was raw, unguarded in a way I'd never seen. I've spent 20 years wondering what happened to her. Whether she was happy. Whether she ever regretted the choice she made. Whether she blamed me for destroying her life. She never mentioned you, I said. But she never seemed happy either. She was always looking over her shoulder. Always afraid. She died scared, Salvatore. Scared that whatever she'd run from had finally found her. Something in his face cracked. I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. If I'd looked for her earlier, if I'd found her before. Before what? Before she died? Before I grew up without understanding why my mother couldn't sleep at night? Before I inherited a past I didn't even know existed? My voice broke. You can't apologize for the past. You can only tell me the truth about what happens next. He reached out, then stopped himself, his hand falling back to his side. What happens next is I protect you. The way I should have protected her. I don't want to be protected. I want to understand. I want to know who my mother really was before she became the woman who raised me. I want to know what she was running from. What she was afraid of. My throat tightened. What she never got to tell me. Then I'll tell you everything I know. Everything I remember about her. Everything I've learned since. Salvatore's voice was quiet but steady. But you need to understand something, Marissa. The more you know, the more you become part of this world. The more you learn about who your mother was, the harder it becomes to walk away from who you might become. I can't walk away. You said it yourself, they already know I exist. They've already torn apart my apartment looking for me. Running just means dying slower. Or surviving longer. My mother survived for 20 years by running. And she still died afraid. I met his eyes. I'd rather face this and at least know why I'm in danger than spend my life looking over my shoulder like she did. Salvatore was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was seeing me for the first time. You're not like her, he said finally. She ran. You're choosing to fight. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. But it's brave. Possibly stupid, but brave. Possibly stupid seems to be a family trait. This time he did smile, a real smile that transformed his face from dangerous to something almost human. Get some rest, he said, stepping back. Tomorrow we start going through everything. My contacts, her history, the people who are looking for you. All of it. Where will you be? Making calls. Activating resources. Making sure that the people who broke into your apartment understand that you're under my protection now. His expression hardened. And that anyone who touches you answers to me personally. He started to walk away, then paused. Your mother told me something that night, he said without turning around. When she was waiting with me for help to arrive. I was bleeding out, barely conscious, and she held my hand and said, "You're going to survive this. And when you do, you're going to remember that someone you didn't know chose to save you. And maybe someday, you'll do the same for someone else." He turned to look at me. I thought I was paying that debt by protecting you. But maybe, he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Maybe I'm the one who needs saving this time. From 20 years of guilt. From wondering if her sacrifice meant anything. He stopped again. From what? I whispered. From forgetting that there are still people in this world worth fighting for. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest. What do we do if I decide to leave? I asked. After all this. After we figure out who's looking for me and why. What happens if I decide the cost is too high? Salvatore was quiet for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then I let you go, he said finally. I give you a new identity. Enough money to start over somewhere far away. And I make sure no one ever finds you. And if I stay? His eyes held mine, dark and unreadable. Then you become something more dangerous than a target, Marissa. You become necessary. To me. To this organization. To the people who depend on the information you can provide. He paused. Necessary is not the same as safe. I know. Do you? Because once you cross that line, there's no going back. Once you become part of this world, it changes you. It changed your mother. It changed me. And it will change you. Maybe I want to be changed. Maybe I'm tired of being the person my mother needed me to be, invisible, forgettable, safe. I set my whiskey glass down on the table. Maybe I want to be the person I choose to be, even if that's dangerous. Something flickered in Salvatore's expression, approval, concern, something else I couldn't name. Then we start tomorrow, he said. And we don't stop until we've found everyone who's looking for you and made sure they understand what happens if they keep looking. He walked away, disappearing into another part of the house, leaving me alone by the fire. I stood there for a long time, watching the flames dance and thinking about my mother. About the choices she'd made. The life she'd built. The fear she'd carried until the day she died. I thought about Salvatore, carrying 20 years of guilt for a girl who'd saved him once and then disappeared. And I thought about myself, standing at the edge of a world I'd never wanted but could no longer escape. My phone buzzed, the new encrypted one Salvatore had given me. A text from an unknown number. We know where you are. We know who's protecting you. It won't be enough. I stared at the message for a long moment, then forwarded it to Salvatore without responding. His reply came within seconds. Let them come. I looked out the window at the dark woods, at the security cameras tracking the perimeter, at the fortress Salvatore had built to keep people like me safe. And I realized something my mother had never understood. Running didn't make you safe. It just made you alone. But fighting, standing your ground with someone powerful enough to fight beside you, that was a different choice entirely. I climbed the stairs to the bedroom Salvatore had indicated, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by the window and watched the woods until dawn, waiting for whatever came next. And hoping that when it arrived, I'd be ready. If you enjoyed this story, kindly subscribe to Undiluted Love Stories for more.